Summer's almost over and school's about to start again, but I think there's time to go cruising up and down the streets of Modesto one last time. So my question today is, where were you in '62? Hi, I'm Jeff, and welcome to A Million Movies. Today we're going to talk about some little-known facts about one of my favorite summer films, the 1973 classic from George Lucas, American Graffiti. So let's get started. One thing about American Graffiti that people may not know is that it's in part an autobiographical film from George Lucas. He took inspiration for 3 of the characters from his own life. The first was Terry the Toad, and Terry represents George when he was a freshman in high school. He admits he was awkward, he was nervous around girls, and that's the character that Terry represents. As George moved into later years of high school and then on to junior college, he got very involved with the custom car culture around Modesto. And that character, that time of his life inspired the character of John. And John is involved into hot rods and street racing, just like George was during those years. And the final character inspired by George Lucas's own life is Kurt, played by Richard Dreyfuss. And that character represents George as he was moving on in his life, becoming much more serious, and moving on to study at USC. The shooting schedule and the budget limitations that George Lucas worked under are legendary. He shot the film in about 28 or 29 days. His total budget was $775,000. The budget came from Universal Pictures, and American Graffiti was part of a series of films that Universal greenlit in the early 70s. They had seen the success of what they called sort of semi-independent films like Easy Rider, and they decided to greenlight 5 films that would be made for less than $1 million. The directors would have a little bit of autonomy to come up with something creative and different, and then they would be released and hopefully generate enough profit to keep the program going. The other films in the series besides American Graffiti were The Hired Hand, The Last Movie, Taking Off, and Silent Running. All those were part of this special program that Universal Pictures had put out. Now, what was going on with this was that George had to find ways to be really efficient both with time and money. And he did a couple of things that really helped with that. The first was that he shot often a lot of scenes, the dialogue scenes in particular, with 2 cameras. So instead of having multiple setups where he would have to move the cameras around and readjust the lights, he worked it so he had both cameras shooting at the same time. Hugely efficient for getting both sides of the action at the same time and shooting the scenes just 1 or 2 times and then moving on to the next one. Another way George Lucas was able to save money was he got a crew that worked very cheap, and for a lot of them worked for free. Instead of being paid, George Lucas promised them that he would give them a title credit in the movie. Now, in 1973, only department heads typically would get their name at the end of a movie or the beginning of a movie. So given the opportunity to have your name actually in the movie was a big deal for a lot of these crew members, and they accepted the deal. They said, we won't get paid, we'll work on your film, but we're excited to see our name up in the movies. Now, because budgets and time were so tight, there were a couple of instances where things that weren't in the script happened, and George Lucas liked what happened and decided to keep it and use that first take. There's a couple of examples I can point to. At the beginning of the film, for example, Charles Martin Smith, who plays Terry the Toad, is pulling up the Mel's Drive-In on his Vespa. He loses control and slams into the building. That wasn't in the script, but George Lucas liked it. It added a bit of humor and a little bit of surprise. It was a first take. He got it. Let's move on and get the next scene. Another example of this happening was when Carol, played by Mackenzie Phillips, is in the car with John, played by Paul Lamette. A group of girls pull up beside them and are throwing water balloons. The water balloon was supposed to hit the side window next to Mackenzie Phillips and splash her in the face. Instead, it hits her full in the face, and instead of being angry like the script asked her to be, she couldn't help but laugh. George liked the way the reaction came across. He felt it was genuine. It didn't alter the story too much, and kept it as a first take. A third example of how this happened is when Terry is trying to get money from Debbie at the liquor store. And Candy is waiting for him in the car. And as he comes back, she asks, Did you get it?
Hey, did you get it? Did you get it? Did you get it? Did you get it? You got it. You got it.
But she flubbed the line, and she went to George Lucas and says, I want to reshoot that scene because I flubbed the line, and George says, no, it's fine, let's go, we're moving on. So there's great scenes where the takes were not perfect, but they were real, and because of the tight schedule, tight budgets, George Lucas said, it's good, good, let's go, and we'll get on to the next shot. Harrison Ford and George Lucas would, of course, team up to make Star Wars a few years later. But in this movie, Harrison Ford's role is relatively small. And George Lucas went to him and said, Harrison, I really need you to cut your hair. Your hair is too long for a character in 1962. Harrison Ford responded, was like, my role is too small for me to cut my hair for, but I'll make a deal with you. I'll wear a hat. George Lucas agreed, and Harrison Ford became the cowboy of American Graffiti. If there's a narrator of American Graffiti, it's probably the Wolfman Jack character as the DJ on the radio. He was cast specifically because George Lucas remembered hearing Wolfman Jack on the radio when he was in high school living in Modesto, and he wanted him to be part of this movie. It reignited Wolfman Jack's career. He became a pretty big celebrity in the 1970s because of his role in American Graffiti. And there's actually a scene in this movie where Wolfman Jack makes a prank phone call to a pizza place, and on the other end of the line is actually George Lucas answering the phone.
Pinky's Pizza.
Yeah, listen, you got any more of those secret agent spy scopes?
Hit parade on the stethoscope.
No, the secret agents.
One of the things that we might not think is unique today, but was unique in 1973, is actually the soundtrack. Before American Graffiti and a few years earlier, Easy Rider did this as well, soundtracks were primarily music written specifically for that movie. With American Graffiti, George Lucas identified 40 different songs that were of the time period that you would have heard in 1962 that he wanted to include in the film and use that as the soundtrack. The studios really had a problem with that. Getting the rights to all those songs and paying the fees to use them was going to jack up the cost, the budget of this film. They really pushed back hard. It wasn't until George Lucas's friend Francis Ford Coppola decided to come on as a producer and throw in some more money to the budget that the studio agreed to let George Lucas use the songs that he wanted to use. Now today, using oldies in a soundtrack isn't as big a deal. You'd hear it in songs for movies from The Big Chill to Dirty Dancing, the songs being used in movies all the way to today. But in 1973, it was pretty unusual and was something that the studio really pushed back hard on. In the sock hop scene, you've got Steve, played by Ron Howard, dancing with Laurie, who's played by Cindy Williams. As they start to dance, you can hear the announcer make an announcement that this is a snowball dance.
Now the next dance is going to be a snowball, and leading it off is last year's class president, Steve Belander, and this year's head cheerleader, Laurie Henderson.
And a snowball dance is one where two people start to dance, and then they break apart, go find other partners, bring them onto the dance floor, and then after a few seconds, those two couples break apart and bring other people on the dance floor, and that continues to repeat until everybody's back on the dance floor. Now, the dialogue between Steve and Laurie is so intense that they never break apart, even though they're the only two people dancing. So if you watch the kids in the background, you can actually see them start to get a little anxious, waiting for their turn to join the dance.
If I had waited for you to ask me.
The executives at Universal were not crazy about the title American Graffiti. They didn't think the public would know what it meant. They wouldn't be able to sort of associate it with this film. They suggested a movie title for it being Another Slow Night in Modesto. Francis Ford Coppola suggested Rock Around the Block. But obviously George Lucas pushed back and was able to keep the movie with his original title in mind, which was American Graffiti. One of the great scenes of American Graffiti was actually improvised. It's a scene towards the end where John and Terry are talking after the drag race where Falfa has wrecked his car. Terry comes over to congratulate him, and John says he admits that he was losing.
Huh? I was losing, man. What? He had me, man. He was pulling away from me just before he crashed. You're crazy. You saw it. No, you creamed him from right off the line. The guy never had a chance.
That scene was scheduled to be shot at another time. The actors hadn't prepped for it. So when it got moved up, they totally just improvised the scene and shot it right there. To give the movie more authenticity, George Lucas really wanted to make sure there were lots of cars on the streets. So he put out a call to the people of in the cities where they shot, requesting that if they had older cars, classic cars, to come out. And some were paid $25 a night for the use of their car. The locals really got into the shooting and made the shot more like what cruising was like in 1962. Between takes, there were even some drag races that happened up and down the streets. So it was sort of like going back in time. The entire scene was like it was in 1962, even though it was 1973. George Lucas was able to include an internal reference, an inside joke, in American Graffiti. The one that most people know about is the license plate on John's car. If you look at it, it says THX 138. This is a reference to George Lucas's previous film, which was THX 1138. And that license plate is now actually on display at Skywalker Ranch, the Lucasfilm's headquarters in Marin County. There's a pretty famous story about Universal's reaction to seeing the film. They really didn't like it. They didn't know what to do with it. And in fact, they put it on a shelf for 6 months while they tried to figure it out. They went and did a screening of it at North Point Theater in San Francisco. And the crowd loved it. It got a great response. The head of Universal was actually there. And even after seeing the crowd response, he still didn't know what to do with it. Francis Ford Coppola, who had come on as a producer of the film, immediately turned to the head of Universal and offered to buy the film from Universal on the spot. Universal had second thoughts. They decided to release the film, and I'm pretty sure they're glad they did. It made $35 million. So on a $775,000 investment, they made $35 million, which is a pretty good turnaround and really cemented George Lucas's career as a writer and a director. The poster for American Graffiti has a very distinctive style, and if you recognize it, there's a good chance you're like me and were a reader of Mad magazine when you were young. The artist of this poster is Mort Drucker, and Mort Drucker was a longtime artist on Mad magazine. And sort of the coincidental thing about this was, in addition to drawing this poster, Mort Drucker had to draw the art that went along with the parody that they did of American Graffiti when they did the parody in Mad magazine. So he did the poster and he did the parody. After American Graffiti, Ron Howard and Cindy Williams were actually reunited in television. Ron Howard had gotten the role of Richie Cunningham on Happy Days, and when Gary Marshall decided to do a spin-off of Two Girls from Milwaukee, he brought in Cindy Williams along with his sister Penny Marshall to be Laverne and Shirley. So there are actually great episodes of Ron Howard and Cindy Williams reunited on the set of Happy Days. So those are my little known facts about American Graffiti. Thank you for sticking through it. I really appreciate it. Let's go to the countdown. Today we talked about The Hired Hand, The Last Movie, Taking Off, Silent Running, Easy Rider. I mentioned The Big Chill and Dirty Dancing. We referenced THX 1138. And of course, we talked about American Graffiti. That brings our total down to 999,951. So that's it for today. I really appreciate you joining me for this episode about American Graffiti. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you'll watch some of my other ones and perhaps subscribe to this channel. That would really help me out. If you have any comments, feedback, suggestion, anything, please put it in the comments section below. I'd love to read that. And hopefully I'll see you on our next episode of A Million Movies.